Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video on trust, justice, and ethics in the wider context of organizational behavior. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So, let's start by talking about trust, justice, and indeed ethics. So, a firm's reputation is, of course, one of its most prized possessions. And, a good reputation is really going to help you. A bad reputation going to hurt you and can be hard to shake. Now, reputation reflects the prominence of a brand in the minds of the public and its perceived quality. And it can be very easily damaged. It can take a long time to, get built back up. So trust is the willingness to be vulnerable to a trustee based on positive expectations about the trustee's actions and intentions. So trust is basically willing to be vulnerable. Risk is actually becoming vulnerable. So as you can see there, they're certainly related, but they're kind of slightly different things. Justice is the perceived fairness of an authority's decision making. And we would of course hope that all authorities are, just indeed. And then ethics, the degree to which the behaviors of an authority are in accordance with generally accepted moral norms. We have disposition-based trust in the realm of trust propensity. So a general expectation that the words, promises, and statements of individuals and groups can be relied upon. Now, which is more damaging in organizational life, being too trusting or being too suspicious? And that's maybe a good time to sort of maybe pause the video, take a minute to think about that, because obviously both can be problematic, right? Being too trusting might seem nice, might seem it might seem nice, but perhaps it's a little utopian. But of course, being too suspicious, maybe that helps you, being a little more kind of risk averse, but that can also look bad. So there's also the sort of the optics of how these things can look. And then trustworthiness, the characteristics or attributes of a trustee that inspire trust. Things like ability, things like benevolence, sort of, the care towards other people, and also integrity. And that, of course, is a big thing. Companies try to, they don't always do a good job of it, but they try to sort of show their patrons, their customers that they're a firm that acts with integrity. They try to care about other people. Think about, for example, like stakeholders versus stockholders as a good example of that. And then effect-based trust. So that's trust rooted in emotion rather than reason. Um, so based on an emotional bond with the trustee, and that's why a lot of like marketing and a lot of in the sort of the consumerist culture in which we live, a lot of it's sort of emotive. It's much more emotion based, but it does help you. It makes you feel like you have a bond when perhaps there really isn't one, but that it's all designed to make you feel that way. And because of that, it acts as a supplement to other types of trust. And then, with respect to justice, trustworthiness can sometimes be difficult to judge, especially early in work relationships. Really, we all know that from any relationship, right? But certainly, work relationships are indeed no exception to that. And justice relevant acts can serve as behavioral evidence of trustworthiness. And then, of course, we list the four types of justice, and we'll kind of discuss these four types a little bit more in the video. Distributive justice, procedural justice, interpersonal justice, and what we term informational justice. So let's start with distributive justice. This reflects the perceived fairness of decision-making outcomes. So, for example, we could gauge it by perceived fairness of outcomes like pay, pay equality, for example, promotions, and maybe work assignments. Equity is typically the norm. That is, more inputs typically lead to more outcomes, which makes sense. Moral judgment. This is the process people use to determine whether a particular course of action is ethical or maybe it's unethical. And there are stages of cognitive moral development. So we have what we call the pre-conventional stage, which focuses on the consequences of actions for the individual. The conventional stage, which references the expectations of one's family and society. And then the principled stage, which of course is the most advanced. And this uses a set of defined, established moral principles. Now, of course, with that being said, those mores, sort of those moral segues, that may be a little different depending on, what culture you're in. And then moral intent. The moral intent reflects an authority's degree of commitment to the moral course of action. So can companies benefit from having better moral awareness and moral judgment, even if their costs rise as a result? And again, That's not a question I'm going to try to answer here, but again, great time to pause the video, think about that from yourself. You could do a little bit of research on that, right? Do companies want to do that? Do they want to come across as being more sort of moral, even if their costs are higher? Maybe that increases business. So maybe, they're able to offset those extra costs with higher revenues. So how important is trust? Trust is a significant predictor of an employee's ability to focus. And of course, it also influences citizenship behavior within the company and counterproductive behavior. And economic exchange relationships will typically lack trust and are narrowly defined quid pro quo, which, if you're not familiar with that term, just means this for that obligations, right? There's an exchange, an arm's length transaction. You give us typically money, we'll give you a product or service. The social exchange relationships have increased trust, and certainly over an economic exchange relationship, and they're characterized by mutual investments going above and beyond expectations. Now, with respect to corporate social responsibility, there's certainly multiple components of this. There's a legal component. What are you required to do? There's an ethical component. What should you do? What do you need to be? And then the social component, maybe more like, what do you need to be seen to be doing, if that makes sense. All right. Thanks for watching this quick video. And I will see you all in a future video. Take care.